We know there are challenges for employers in the market. From market trends to interviews with industry leaders, let us be your trusted advisor as we explore the Benefit Summary, presented by Genesis Health, with your host, Matt Monahan.
Well, welcome to the launching episode of the Benefit Summary podcast, brought to you by Genesis Health. With me today is Jim Huebner, National Accounts Practice Leader at Reliance Standard. We're going to talk about leave management. We're going to jump right into it. But Jim, thank you so much for joining. You're a brave man being willing to do this with me for the first time.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so excited. This is hip and vogue, so I'm really honored to be a guest here.
We feel like 20 years younger.
I don't know. Feel is one thing looking. I got the gray hair going on, but we could cure that at CVS quickly.
Yeah. Well, so why don't we do this? If you don't mind, could you give me a little background on yourself? Even more so, like, how did you get into the business? Because, this is one of those businesses where it feels like we all kind of like backed into it somehow. So I'd love to hear a little bit of your backstory and just help our listeners understand, who you are, where you came from, and why you do what you do.
Sure. So right now I'm the National Account Practice Leader for an ancillary carrier. I oversee the national account cycle. We're claims, operations, legal, tech. I work to develop new solutions for clients. My background started off like many others in the group insurance world, where I was in the service industry. A little bit of bartending, a little bit of busboy, a little bit of waiter, jumped to insurance, worked for a couple companies as a group distributor of ancillary products, life, disability programs. I latched onto this right away. That world was really rate driven. You saw the commoditization of those programs. And what I loved about what I do now is, at the time, with the company I'm with, my practice leader would come in and help us really sell value to clients and why they should outsource FMLA and how important it was. I just saw how that really transcended that commoditization. And it was so gratifying. You could see in the client's eyes that it really brought them solutions for things they were struggling with and had a lot of pain. So I've been back in this role now for about 8 years. I think this is what our industry is about, is bringing value and bring something real to solve for clients' pains and help them out.
Yeah, I mean, gone are the rate days, right? Where we're sitting there, the race to zero. Now It's like, we got to start solving problems, or this business is for nothing. And that's a big focus for us as well. But I love that part of the business, and that's what makes us interesting, is even having a conversation like this. And that's how we got to here, was all the cool conversations we were having led us to having interest in trying to share those conversations in a more real manner, so people could hear like how the sausage is made in our world. Because a lot of people just see like rates on a page, and that's how they're making decisions. And this is so much further than that. It's actually, to me, what makes this really exciting. And like you, I stumbled into this as well. So it's kind of like, bartending, construction, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, I'm selling insurance in 2002. But through that, we've seen such an evolution to change. Like, we've seen so much shift over the last, call it 6 years, but even going back 15 to 20 years, there were 5 state leaves, FML, and that was about it. It wasn't that complicated. It's gotten so much harder for HR teams. But through that, what are you seeing now in the marketplace?
It's a real call to action for employers to really consider strongly outsourcing their FMLA and the leave programs, and primarily due to the proliferation of the paid family medical leave laws. We're in the Northeast. Geographically, proximity-wise, we're here in New York now, but there was New York DBL, PFL came about 5 years ago. Then next, East Coast-wise, we had Massachusetts, then Connecticut. Pennsylvania now has legislation pending. Maryland and Delaware have passed. So everybody's really had to evaluate what is going to be required of them as an employer. Are there communications? Are there contributions or taxes they're going to have to figure out and run through payroll, as well as just the process for an employee when they ask for an absence? Do they have to go to another entity for it to be evaluated? What's the eligibility and criteria, which is so much different. Complexities just alone from job protections. In Massachusetts, you can have a cousin that you need to take time away from work from, and it's one of the eligible reasons that you could take that time away. Under FMLA, it's not. So the intersection of FMLA and these paid family medical leave laws has really driven organizations to consider outsourcing.
Yeah, and it's the amount of work that goes into it is staggering. When you start thinking about the support that goes on at an employer level and how many people from the HR team, the payroll teams are now engaged in that as a person who's on an executive team, I want to make sure my employees are not doing that. I need them to do so many other things besides keying in disability and keying in leaves and tracking and making sure it's all compliant. And then there's the risk components of it all. But it's just fascinating how quickly this changed. 15 years, 20 years, and this was, in a blink of an eye, this whole marketplace realigned. And it's more. I got a question today about, is New York going to pass long-term care insurance? Along the lines of what they're doing in Oregon. And it doesn't stop there. I had someone else ask me today about monkeypox. And, is there going to be anything coming out in New York about monkeypox vaccinations and how that's going to impact medical? So, the pandemic really changed a lot of this and compounded it. Did you guys see that and feel that on your book of business? What were you feeling through the pandemic, and what were the changes or shifts or what did that bring to a head for you guys?
It did. It proved one thing. In our world today, you had to be nimble because employers were asking for certain things that maybe the law didn't cover, right? Employees quarantined due to COVID, childcare reasons, schools closures. So a lot of clients and organizations are asking us to develop company-sponsored leaves where we can specifically track and identify time away due to the pandemic. One thing that employers were really saddled with kind of as we got through Omicron and even somewhat during the pandemic was the accountability to follow the ADA law as guided by the EEOC.
Yeah.
Right. Especially towards the tail end where employees were telling their employers that had a mandatory vax policy that they wanted to really be assessed for a vaccine exemption, where they believed they couldn't get the vaccine due to underlying disabling conditions. So employers really struggle with that, not to mention employees now maybe want to stay at home and believe they could perform their essential function of their job, where they're going to ask for an ADA accommodation now as some companies try and get back to the workforce. So ADA is just wrought with so much an administrative headache and a rigor and an interactive conversation and documentation to really put you in a defensible position. But I think that really came out for employers to even further look to outsource that to an absence management partner.
Yeah. In the it felt like in the EEOC world, like we were updating clients weekly. I mean, that changed on the fly on a weekly basis with all the updates, the COVID guidance, and then you run into city leaves. Remember, like the city of Pittsburgh had their own leave. Then you had the state leaves, and they're still looking at driving in more state leaves that are getting approved. There was one recently. Was that Louisiana?
I think it was Louisiana.
Yeah, Louisiana just went. So, like, I mean, you're seeing that happen, and like, it's just they keep coming, and there's more options coming out there. And in certain states, like, it's now, how rich can the benefits get? Like we're starting to see that on the West Coast. It's starting to shift. I think we'll see some shifting in the DBL benefit in New York soon. But like all of those leaves are starting to, transcend in complexity and cost. And so for an employer, we always think about the employee experience and what's the employer experience. And there's the component of trying to save money for the employer, which is really important, but also the ROI and all this comes down to like gain time back for your employees. Where could you put that, allocate those resources somewhere else if you start outsourcing with somebody who does this? I mean, because there's a lot of different vendors out there, in my opinion, that talk about this and say they do this great, but leave management itself, I think there's very few that truly focus on this. And that's a core competency that you guys have shown and something that I, from our relationship, I've always loved working with you guys because that is a core competency. And it goes beyond that. It's also, I mean, I view it as a passion for you guys. It's something that you guys look at differently. I can see you smiling, so I know you have something to say on that.
No, we do. We do find it a passion. Again, it's gratifying, but it's so complex. It's not just adjudicating a disability claim, right? These employees are accustomed to being dealt with as a consumer globally in an easy manner. Today's the day and age of different modalities. You can purchase things over the web, over a mobile application. You can call in. But it's not just does somebody meet the criteria of policy and paying them. It's with all these paid family and medical leave laws, statutory disability programs, providing everybody terms it, the customer experience, but really making it frictionless. Can you navigate that employee for what they're going out for and give them the real good understanding in an empathetic and consultative manner on what's job protection and what's a pay component? Because they all overlay on one on top of another.
Yeah.
Somebody in Massachusetts, you've got family medical leave, you've got short-term disability, they're going out for maternity, there's FMLA for bonding, mass PFML for bonding, and it may be company-sponsored programs. So they want to know how all these interact and what's paid and where's one stop and start. That takes time. So the right absence management provider is not going to push work back to the client to be that concierge services. They're going to put this on their shoulders and not only keep you in compliance, follow the letter of the law, but deal with your employees in a qualitative manner as if we're an extension of human resources. That's essentially what you're looking for. And we do find that gratifying.
Yeah, it is. But I think also it speaks to some of the work you guys are doing from a technology standpoint. Because when you talk about a buying experience, everyone thinks of how we buy everything, right? On Amazon. So you go online, you do that, and that speaks to integration. So all the back-end integrations. And that's been, the ancillary arm race for the last, couple of years now is trying to sort out the APIs and getting it. Because what a lot of people don't understand is half of these leaves were facilitated via fax, phone call, or mail. Which is if you could compile the 3 most efficient ways to do anything, that's 1, 2, and 3 in any order, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And that's not limited to leaves. That's, medical fax was a preferred mode of communication. It still is because it's considered secure, but it was a preferred mode of communication from, my time at Aetna to the doctors we were communicating with. So I think the API component of this, as we get into it, is going to be really important because that integration is also how you can remove, it creates the interface. For people who don't know what the API is, it's basically 2 systems talking back and forth to each other. So what's seen in one system is seen in the other system. And so when you buy something on Amazon, you purchase that, and you hit a button that says buy, and another system sees it, and that's being processed. And in our world, that hasn't existed ever. The best case scenario was a feed, which is like electricity going one way, but it doesn't come back. And so that API integration, as we build out this industry, becomes much, much more important. And that's, I think, part of the experience that's going to improve through a lot of the work you guys are doing. But what are you seeing on the API front? It's
key. It's such a time saver HR, because somebody behind the scenes, no matter what transaction happens with leave or disability, is got to key that information manually back into their HRIS tenant. Matt's going to go out on this date. His estimated return on this date. His actual return to work is this date. Somebody in HR takes all those employees that were out and keys this information in, whatever the cadence might be, daily, weekly, monthly, but it's got to happen because there's a supervisor who's looking at their system of record and wants to understand how many days the employee's been out, what their patterns are like, and ultimately they're trying to gap staff around that absence. Even with payroll, if you have any accounts out there that are advice to pay or self-insured short-term disability, most carriers will send out a payroll report. Pay Matt from this date to this date with this amount. So just envision all these manual tasks eradicated by the transfer of information automatically. Not what we send you and data dump upon you as a client, and then you have to take and upload it. But as things happen, API's automatic processing interface, this information will be transported and exported via those vehicles to their source systems, whether it's payroll, whether it's time and attendance, or even their HRIS tenant. Yep. So huge return in human capital for HR to really take advantage of these things. And even to further that, Matt, to be honest, it's becoming part of the evaluation of most organizations on which HCM they purchased. And we talked about this in the past, that it's almost like if you buy a portable speaker for your iPhone, is it Bluetooth enabled? You don't want the wire anymore. So the common misnomer is a lot of the platforms out there have API connectivity, which is not true. They're also enhancing their capabilities and their solutions to include those. But just Workday, for example, right? Some others out there really progressed what they can offer a client as far as receiving data on an API basis.
Well, I think that was also, like, Ben Admin Systems took people out of paper, which was awesome, because paper sucks. I think that's the industry term, like, paper sucks. But I think as I think about it, the misnomer in that was, an employee would go in and enroll, and because they're used to the transactional buying experience, they would submit their data, and they'd be like, I'm done. And then they would go to the doctor 3 weeks later, and they'd be told that they don't have coverage because the EDI feed never went through, or it broke, or it didn't go, and there was no API. And they're like, but I enrolled. And so, like, that's the buying interface that people are having. Then the buying experience is like, I don't have coverage because the EDI feed didn't go and something happened. And if you have API, it removes all of that. And, from a leave standpoint, there's just so many more interactions. It doesn't stop. It's just like the provider bills and, it's over. There's transactional components to that continue to happen. And if that can happen via the system and take a human interaction out of it, we'll all miss human interactions, but this is not one place where we will. Like, in my opinion, that's where this becomes more simple to administer once we get those in place. And then, like, I think that also speaks to, like, the product stack, because we talked a lot about, it's not just the leave management. Can you integrate with other products? And this enables some of that too. But, like, have you seen, a movement of shifting in additional products like the hospital, the accident, critical illness, and having that integrate with these and some of the synergies that creates? Because that's another area where, it's one less claim form, for instance, and it doesn't sound like much, but it's a better buying experience. It's a better experience for the employees who have to use the benefits. So what are you guys doing there?
It doesn't sound like much, you're right. But behind the scenes, most organizations have a statutory disability examiner, an FMLA examiner, a voluntary benefits claim examiner that an employee would have to deal with once they indicate they're going to go out, right? And there was an event attached to that. Our mission, and just in general, what I'm seeing employers want was, again, that seamless, frictionless experience for employees. One phone call, one initiation of an absence on a mobile app or a web, but really they want one contact to deal with. And not just a customer contact, but they really want to speak to that individual that's going to pay their compensable benefits, issue their job protections. And if you have the data available on what their supplemental health elections were, automatically go ahead and adjudicate and pay those benefits, right? It just made sense for us, as well as some other carriers, to try and formulate this, because you can really handle the employee holistically versus some other avenues where there's a sweep and you send out a notification that they might be eligible. Most events, 66 and 2/3 of events, are tied to an absence. So you're going to see more of a push by carriers trying to integrate the claims administration onto their absence platforms, because, again, it'll lead to that one experience for the employee.
When I think the absence gets triggered faster, because the other way to do this is via medical claims, right? Like that's another, but like by doing that, you're delayed because you're only as effective as when the provider submits, which can have a 2 to 3 month lag versus like, if someone's out for multiple weeks because of an accident, if they get in a car accident or something, at some point somebody's going to key in, they're on FMLA or that's going to go in. And I think that process is faster. So again, it gets money in the hands of the employees. You see the Aflac commercials, right? They give like, we pay, when you can't work or whatever they say, but like some version of that. But I think this simplifies that process for them. And I think by being able to have the leave component trickle into, and feed into the other information to the claims for critical illness accident hospital, it just makes it's seamless.
It's a win. It's
a huge win. And that also plays into like the life insurance too.
Right.
Because that gets lost in the sauce. But like, life insurance is one of the ones that you want to pay out as quickly as possible because it's when someone's at most in need. Even beyond the critical illness accident hospital, that integration with the life insurance too, being able to trigger claims there, as well.
Yeah, we see that still kind of mutually exclusive to some degree, but I think the efficiency we allow, and you'll see most of the market trying to follow, is the waiver of premium.
Yeah.
When you bridge somebody from STD and FMLA to LTD, that can automatically happen. You remember years ago, I love that term, lost in the sauce, that somebody might have not followed the waiver of premium forms, and then you have a death claim, and then, everybody's really up creek when I paddle.
Yeah.
So
we can curse when our parents aren't listening.
Right. Wow.
But no, I agree with you, and I think the waiver premium thing was big because I dealt with a number of different claims in my career where those didn't get covered, where you would have someone who lost out on their life insurance benefit because they didn't know they had to do that, and I think being able to trigger that, it's the right thing to do because none of us want to put products in front of people that they're not going to leverage or use. The intent is like this is for when you need it. Sadly, like that type of claim is a death, but your family needs it, and having a technicality be the reason you don't get it because there wasn't a support system or mechanism in place to make sure that happens, was a gap for a long time.
Exactly.
So that's something I think is really exciting. And so, as we move forward, like those APIs, I think are going to change this industry. And I think the systems need that. And that's been one of the biggest challenges is like there's no system interface for a long time in our business. Hasn't happened. So, I'm excited to see, where you guys bring that and, how you leverage those technologies. And I don't even think it matters whether it's like with an API aggregator or if it's just with your own APIs that you build. But like, I think the more systems you can connect to, Ben admin systems specifically, the better the experience. And also like, I think for a sales team, like it becomes easier to sell because you are selling the solution. You're not selling the dollar.
Exactly. Solutions what it's about. There's a lot of misnomers about there, but APIs too. So the only caution I would give if employers are listening and they really want to go down this path to take advantage of the eradication of manual interventions is that really understand that there is no cookie cutter API. For us, every tenant a client purchases are different from the tenant from the same company that another client would purchase. So it's really understanding and have the resources available. We call them software engineers to dig into really, in essence, in transference, what do you want our system to input into your system on an API basis, real time, but it's also really being consultative and going through what aren't you capturing that could be helpful for your supervisors and managerial staff or yourselves as you're trying to really monitor employees or key dates that you got to be aware of from a manager's perspective. So it's really understanding the logic behind the programming and not just, again, thinking somebody says they have API capabilities, just going with that. It's digging into it, understanding your tenant, which really leads to, HR had to deal with the CFO, right? There's a strong push to outsource FMLA due to the PFML, but there's so many stakeholders that have to be involved now. You've got the CFO to see if your solution would match up with their budgetary constraints. You've got HR to evaluate if an absence management provider or platform really align with how they qualitatively treat their employees. You've got payroll, especially with PFML, to make sure they're getting the information to pay employees correctly. Or if you go down the integration route, could they really feed back into that payroll tenant in a secure manner all the valuable data they need to pay people at the appropriate pay counters? And then you've got legal, especially with ADA. FMLA, they understand most of the objectives of outsourcing is consistency, application of law, but ADA, they definitely want to be involved. And they sometimes could be your strongest advocate to go to the CFO to say, pay for that ADA outsourcing on the right model, where they're still allowed the ability to make the decision or deny or approve.
Yep. Almost like an advice to pay model in that scenario, right?
Correct.
So, because that kind of brings me to one of the questions I had, which was, we talked about like the APIs, but like the trends and like what you're seeing. So when we talk about like all the different buyers, and we talked the other day about that as well, It may not sound like it, but we did prep. But I think, trying to figure out, what are some of the trends out there and like what people should be thinking about. So if I'm a CFO or I'm a chief human resource officer, chief people officer, like what should I be thinking about? Like, what are you hearing? Like when you sit you've done a finals meeting this morning, you got another one this afternoon. When you sit in those meetings, like what would you love them to be considering? And it, like, even if it wasn't for you, if you were just, what should they think about when they're buying these products and why should they think about that?
Yeah, I think for one, they should take into consideration all those dynamics we just mentioned and the components, right? Integrations. But I would ask them to deconstruct integration on what they're being presented to. Is it really one examiner that's going to navigate and be a single point of contact for that employee throughout that journey? I think you've got to be really mindful after you weigh out all those components to really make the best and mindful decision as possible, because the last thing you'd want to do as a CFO and an HR team is make the wrong decision where you thought it was going to alleviate or allay work from your desk, and it's brought back onto your desk because it's not done in an efficient or with quality, right? People still have questions. Okay, the law, payments, and HR still has to get involved where, in essence, their end goal was to really still provide a concierge level of service to their employees internally, but then have them shift their energy and focus from time you're saving, if you were outsourcing in the right vehicle, to strategic attraction and retention of employees, right? Because that's what we're facing, the great labor shortage, the great resignation. So much efforts are focused on that. But if you're going to make a decision, make it be the right one so you're not pulled back in, as Michael Corleone would say.
Yeah. And it's funny, the great resignation, like we've heard a ton about that. I have called it the great reassessment because I think we saw a lot of people retire. I think a lot of people were like, I don't want to do this anymore, and I want to change careers. It gave people like the ability to pivot, but it also gave people through that like different voice on what they want their day to look like. Do I want to go to the city? Do I want to stay home? What does work from home look like? How many times can my kids get in the video while I'm doing a conference call? Like all that stuff. But like I think that going back to like what we talked about earlier on the ADA stuff, like that is all different stuff that is really important to employees now. And on top of that, it gave them choice. And I think that was what was gained. Like if there was a gift COVID gave us besides the ability to figure out how to work Zoom proficiently, it was the ability to know you have some choice or believe that you have choice, because going into work and those accommodations I think are going to be interesting, because like the one thing that the other gift that COVID gave us was the mental health component. And I think like as you start looking at some of the ADA stuff, like there's going to be a higher level of people who are saying, I can't go here because of stress. I don't want to do this because of mental health reasons. And that's going to become a more prevalent conversation than what we saw before. Have you seen that already on your block? Or?
We have, even just in typical STD FMLA evaluation, mental health, behavioral health is probably number 3 categorically across our block. So you take 7 years ago, not that employers wanted to be heavy-handed on that issue where claims came in when you're evaluating them. What they wanted was a thorough assertion of what was the functional impairment of the employee. So I think if you're really evaluating different models, you want to make sure you have the right clinical resources involved at the right time. So we are faced with that now. Face it, everybody's been cooped up for 3 years. Yeah. Our social skills, hesitancy to go back to work, pressures in front of people versus when you're at home, maybe you can cope with them better. And just, overall duress and stress of life. But I think between just really being balanced on how you look at mental health, behavioral health claims with the right resources, as well as when it comes to ADA, people asking for those different accommodations to remain telecommuting, you've got to gravitate back to, did the employee perform the essential functions of their job prior to the pandemic, and then through the pandemic working remotely? It's going to be hard to pull them back in just because you want to encourage camaraderie, right? Yep. So it's something that definitely I think there's so much of a difference when you're around people, the socialization, the energy, and just the ad hoc team thinking and building process, right, that you benefit from. But those folks around an ADA accommodation or are being asked to come back and they're asking for those, it's going to be a balancing act by employers and how they address those.
I think it's going to be challenging. I think we're going to see a lot more hoteling. Like I think people will have to come back in every cycle. You go through like, we're going to go work from home until it's not efficient. And then all of a sudden someone's going to say, everybody's coming back whether you like it or not. Jim, as we talk about some of the strain and stress that COVID has brought to this and to the world and what it's done to employers and stuff, and we talked about the mental health, one of the things I'd love to hear about is how you guys are integrating through leaves and your claim functions. Like, how are you guys referring stuff like that out to EAP? What does that look like? Because you guys have a more robust EAP than a lot of people in the marketplace. And so that was something that I found really interesting. I'd love to see how that works, integrates, And it just kind of like, especially is really relevant now because I think we're getting so many questions from employers on mental health, and rightfully so, especially with how understaffed we are from a provider standpoint across the country. But what are you guys doing there, and how are you guys impacting that? Because this is a real hot button for us.
Yeah, and it is us too as well. At Reliance Standard, we use a company called ACI, but I think it starts with upfront program communication, right?
Yep.
You want to thwart anything from becoming a comorbidity where somebody hurts their back and has a severe injury, and then they become depressed throughout their leave journey. But upfront communication, making employees know about the availability of the program. And then we were very careful to select an organization that had those different preferences, user interface preferences, that we offer to give the employees choice now they want to interact with our EAP provider. So whether it's telemedicine, a Zoom, a chat on your phone, through the web, or a phone call, again, it'll give people to pick and choose their preference on how they want to communicate with us and also receive that counseling. I think one of the things we do also, besides that upfront communications, posters, training videos for supervisors, right, and all upfront effort is during an absence, when an employee initially reports an absence to us, we're strong in reminding them that we have an EAP program. Here are the numbers. We provide communications back to the employee as legally required through our intake packets that'll provide even more information on how to contact the EAP. And then throughout the life of an absence, we're also reaffirming that, right? Because again, we don't want that comorbidity situation to come up. Somebody's out to care for someone, right? Maybe their spouse or loved one has a critical illness, and now they start to become depressed, right? Because that'll prolong, and you're going to hurt overall productivity returning that employee in a formidable fashion. Or it could be musculoskeletal. So yeah, all efforts are on our upfront communication that throughout the life of an absence, regardless if they are disabled or they're out for FMLA to care for others, you want to make sure they're aware of the EAP program and the benefits to it constantly. So if they need to tap that on the shoulder and take advantage of it, they can.
Yeah. And the stigma on that has changed too, because it used to be like, I'll just muscle through it. And we're Irish, so like, I don't know if we ever talked about a problem when I was growing up, but like I think as you go through this, like people are more open to dealing with that. And I think like the EAP, much like the telemedicine, provides people the opportunity to do it in a safe environment. You can do it from home. You don't have to go to a doctor's office. You don't have to sit on the couch. It's just you can sit on your own couch and you can talk to somebody. And I think when you're going through this, you're right. Like so you have a significant other that's not feeling well or has a critical illness, or your parent, you don't really know where to turn. And like you also probably don't have time to go to the doctor. Like that's another challenge. And so being able to at least have that outreach and being able to identify that is super important.
It is. I mean, choice, preference, modality, and also coverage too, right? Most EAP programs out there sponsored by ancillary carriers are just for the employee. Our coverage, well, believe one differentiator is it's not just the employees, but anybody in the household. So when somebody's hurt or sick at home, it affects everyone. Children, people living with you, right? Now extended families today. So anybody can call and utilize those services as they see fit within that household. I think that's also something special too.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a ripple in a pond.
Yeah, I mean, well, listen, there's for mental health right now, like we need any solution we can bring to employees to give them opportunity to help improve their mental health. And it's been a hot button. We see it on the medical side consistently, with our clients, evaluating different solutions that are out there. But without some sort of support, there's not a ton of places for people to turn. And this is one aspect of any good wellness program, which is, multiple ways of getting people into, corrective behaviors and doing things that are going to make them healthier. And, as employers, as they look at implementing leave and putting in, with all the different challenges that come with that, these leaves are to facilitate and support people through some really challenging times. So being able to communicate that EAP piece is really important. Whether or not an employee, takes it or engages with it is the part we can't control, but we can definitely give them the opportunity to have that option.
Absolutely.
So as you think of as employers think of purchasing, leave, I think we mentioned how many different people are involved in the decision now, but what is a good way for an employer to commit to, who's committed to either changing from the vendor that they have, or an employer that is looking to implement something that's going to not be administered internally? What should they be considering as far as putting a committee together? Because I don't think this is a decision that somebody should make in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. Whether it's the CFO doing it for their specific reason, or the HR team doing it for their specific reason. Each decision, HR could say we're going to do this, but then that has a downstream implication on the payroll team. It's going to have a financial component in the legal component. So how do you consider who should be on a committee? What would you want to look at, and what types of things should they be thinking about in that purchase? Meaning who's directly impacted? If I make this decision, who's responsible? What does that look like? And being thoughtful in their decision, because there's a lot of moving parts.
Mm-hmm. Well, for sure, CFO, right? I mean, you deal with CFOs all the time on
Yeah.
cost projections and what's going to be the ramifications of this move. CFO for to finding out if the solution they're thinking of purchasing would fit inside their budget. That's number one. There's an inherent ROI from outsourcing, right? Just aside from litigation avoidance and that risk inherent with that, there's efficiencies to be found. So HR kind of champions this. And then you've got the CHRO or head of global rewards. It's focused on the culture of the organization you're going to align with, right? And culture is a big thing today, right? DE&I, the values of the organization you're going to select to line up with your values as well. So that's kind of prompt number one. And then you've got HR manager, HR leadership, and then the lead managers. There's usually folks in every organization that are the ones in charge and responsible for kind of navigating employees either back to vendor, or if they're still in-house managing the FMLA themselves, they're the ones doing the FMLA and the paperwork and the level of administrivia that they're just inundated with. So it's getting their buy-in too and helping them understand that they're still going to be very much valuable in the decision-making process, because then again, they could focus their efforts on strategery, more high-level concierge, really navigating employees holistically, not just through the minutiae that might have got lost with an incompetent vendor, if I say in that manner. And then you've got payroll, right? So what is payroll going to have to be provided? Either payroll report, or if there's paid family medical leaves and the intersection of STD and those and paid parental, how do they know who to offset? How do they know who to top up if they have a PTO plan or extended sick leave program? And then you've got legal, again, sitting in the background saying, who are you moving to? Let me see their letters, the communications, they fall within the scope of the law, and are they going to ensure we're kept in compliance, in a consistent manner?
Yep.
Especially with ADA, right? They really want to be mindful of what are you doing with our employee? Do we have a say in this? When should we sit in on these interactive conversations? And what are you going to provide to us? Again, knowing that we still have the ability to make the determination or not to approve or deny these accommodations. But they have a hand in this as well, too.
Yep.
But it usually from budgetarily to globally, CHRO, NHR, do we align? Do we fit? Are we going to handle employees as if we were an extension of human resources? And then those leave of absence specialists, do they have the data to know who's out, when people are coming back to work? And this is all kind of transfigured into providing an employer with workforce management tools. That's another thing the pandemic really taught us, Matt, was you've got to be able to be dynamic on how you flow information back, not just to HR, but to supervisors and managers. Because that's that other audience that really is calling up HR saying, where's my employee today? I'm in manufacturing or distribution or retail. I'm resting on 4 people being here and I've got 2 out. How do I continue my operations? Where are they? So the more you can stay in lockstep between supervisor, manager, and HR, helping them understand when employees are going to be out and when they're coming back. And then you've got the flow back into payroll, who gets paid, legal, and then lastly, tech, IT, and HRIS.
I was about to ask you that.
So
I'm
they're
glad you brought it
key.
up.
So here's the flow back of that information, everything we manage back into their payroll tenant or HRIS tenant or time and attendance tenant. They've got to be the ones saying, all right, this is what we require. Here's our level of security. Here's what we think we need to configure. You've really got to instill trust and confidence that you can understand the logic behind the programming and what you've got to achieve in that data transference via APIs.
Yeah. Yeah, and the tech, I think, allows you to kind of like also do some truth evaluation on, what those integrations are.
Yes.
Because like that's not a language not all of us speak efficiently. So I think I definitely don't personally. That was like a Freudian slip. I do not. I know a lot about it, but it's one of those things that like if someone was walking me through like the specs on an API, I wouldn't know how to do it. So having the tech team be able to provide input on, is this real? And what's the integration, and then validating like how their systems can coordinate between is a really important part of that. So, I mean, it's funny. This is one of the most challenging things to purchase because there is a tremendous ROI. There is a lot of really good, not a lot, but there are really good solutions. You guys being one of them, that are out there in the marketplace that can make a difference. But it's also, it comes with, making a change comes with some work. Onboarding any new product is work, but like this type of implementation takes some effort from the HR team and, from all the people we just talked about. All those stakeholders are going to have some skin in this game. And so it can be an overwhelming decision, but at the same time, I think the long-term benefit of being able to outsource for somebody who specializes in this, who is passionate about it, and who aligns with their values, in my opinion, can drastically change the employee experience at one of their lower moments, which is when they're out on leave to care for somebody, or when they're higher moments, because they could be out on maternity leave, right? Like, or paternity leave. And like, those are newer leaves. Maternity isn't, but paternity is becoming far more popular in this world, which it should be, right? Like, it allows bonding time with children. And so all of those things are great additions, but they're also new leaves. And we're seeing, more and more leaves coming through, through the states and everything. So as we kind of wrap up today, that's one of the things that I keep thinking about is how can we continue to improve the employee experience? And if we're going to spend all this money on benefits, it might as well be doing something to dramatically impact our employees in a positive way. That is inherently important. And we're seeing that, from stuff we do at Genesis on the medical side. We're doing that on the leave management side to the extent that we can to make sure that people are utilizing these benefits appropriately and finding partners like yourself where we can align our clients to people who are passionate about these products in a way that we are passionate about this. And that's, to me, how we make these valuable and gain ROI for employees. But, I think with that, Jim, I think we did it.
I think we did.
I think we did it. This was fantastic. I really appreciate you joining us. This was an awesome visit, and we'll definitely do this again. It's always a good excuse to get out in Manhattan as well. So I appreciate you having come down, and good luck on the finals meeting this afternoon.
Thank you.
And thanks, Jim. This was fantastic.
Our pleasure.
Get more out of your benefits when you connect with Genesis Health on LinkedIn or through our website, www.genesis.health. And be sure to subscribe to the Benefit Summary wherever you get your podcasts. That way you don't miss the benefit of future episodes. This has been the Benefit Summary, presented by your friends at Genesis Health.